The year was 1586. England was burning in the quiet war of faith. A war fought not with swords, but with silence, betrayal, and the sound of footsteps outside your door. In York, behind the narrow streets and timber-built houses, a woman named Margaret Clitherow lived two lives, one public, one hidden in shadow. To her neighbors, she was the wife of a respected butcher. To the crown, she was a traitor, a Catholic in Protestant England, harboring outlawed priests under her own roof. At that time, to shelter a Catholic priest was considered an act of treason, a crime punishable by death. Yet Margaret's small home on the Shambles became a secret chapel. Beneath floorboards and behind walls, priests would say Mass by candlelight. In a world where faith could kill, her courage was extraordinary. Her husband, John Clitherow, remained Protestant, at least in name, but he looked away. Many men in York feared the government's eyes. Few dared to defy them. Margaret did not fear. "I am resolved," she once said, "and I will not turn my back on my God." She was watched for years. The authorities had heard rumors of hidden masses, of strange visitors entering at night. But there was no proof, until one morning in March 1586 when soldiers arrived with a warrant. Someone had spoken. The search was brutal. They tore apart furniture, pried open floorboards, smashed through walls. And then they found it, a small secret chamber beneath the stairs. Inside were the sacred objects that would damn her, chalices, vestments, and the crucifix used in forbidden worship. It was enough to condemn her. Margaret was arrested and taken to the York Assizes. The charge was clear: harboring Catholic priests, violating the Act of 1585. She stood before the court, her face calm, her hands bound. The judge demanded that she plead guilty or not guilty. She refused. To refuse a plea was not defiance alone. It was a calculated act. In those days, if you pled guilty, your property was seized and your family ruined. If you pled not guilty, you faced trial, and the torture that came with it. But if you refused to plead at all, the law had a different punishment. It was called peine forte et dure, strong and hard punishment, a sentence of pressing. You were laid on the ground, a wooden door placed upon you, and stones piled on top until your ribs cracked and your breath stopped. It was meant to break the will. When Margaret refused to enter a plea, the judge warned her, "You shall be pressed to death." She answered quietly, "I am willing to die." They gave her 3 days to reconsider. Priests were hunted and informers thrived. If she confessed, they promised, her life might be spared. If she betrayed the names of the priests she'd helped, the sentence could be commuted. She refused again. "I will not accuse any," she said. "I die for love of my Lord." In the days before her execution, she prayed constantly. Fellow prisoners later said she was serene, almost radiant. Her only fear was that her death might cause scandal, that others might suffer for her choices. She wrote a letter to her stepfather, "Pray for me and all those who suffer for conscience." March 25, 1586, the Feast of the Annunciation. At dawn, the streets of York were cold and damp. The place chosen for her death was the toll booth on Ouse Bridge, a place where merchants once weighed goods, now to become a site of execution. They brought her there bound, her wrists tied with rope. She was dressed simply, barefoot. The sheriff read the sentence. The crowd watched in silence, some out of hatred, others out of pity. A few women wept. She knelt, prayed softly, and removed her wedding ring. The door was placed flat upon the ground. She lay down, her face turned toward the earth, her arms stretched wide as if in prayer. They placed a linen cloth over her body, then a wooden board, and then the stones, one by one. The first stones made her gasp. The next cracked ribs. A sheriff's assistant wrote that she uttered no cry, but only prayed, "Jesu, Jesu, Jesu, have mercy upon me." Her chest collapsed slowly under the weight. Within 15 minutes, she was dead. The executioners left her there for another quarter hour to be certain. When they removed the stones, her body was broken, ribs shattered, skin bruised black. They buried her secretly, without a coffin, outside the city walls. News of her death spread quickly. Some said the crowd left in silence, shaken by what they had witnessed. Others said her calm face in death became a symbol of faith stronger than any sermon. To the authorities, she was a traitor who refused justice. To the Catholics of England, she became a martyr. Years later, witnesses testified to her courage. Even her Protestant neighbors admitted she had shown a constancy not seen among men. Her children grew up divided by the laws that had killed her. One became a nun, another a priest. Her youngest son later said, "I saw her faith, and I saw her die for it." I could never forget. Centuries passed, but the story of Margaret Clitherow endured. The site of her house in York became a hidden shrine, marked quietly by those who still remembered. In 1970, she was canonized by the Catholic Church, Saint Margaret Clitherow, the Pearl of York. But behind the sainthood, behind the stories and prayers, lies the raw truth. A woman crushed beneath the weight of a kingdom's fear. Her body, broken under stones, became a symbol of how power turns faith into crime and conscience into death. The Reformation left deep scars across England. Catholics and Protestants alike used torture, law, and fear to silence one another. Margaret's death was only one of many, but it spoke louder than most. It revealed what happens when conviction meets cruelty, when belief becomes rebellion, and when a woman refuses to kneel before anything but her own faith. After Margaret's death, the silence that followed was louder than any outcry. York's streets returned to their trade, but the memory of that morning lingered like a ghost. Those who had seen her execution spoke of it in whispers. Some called it justice, others blasphemy. But for many, it was something else entirely, a question that refused to die. The government had meant her death to be a warning, a lesson in obedience, but what it became was a spark. Among Catholics in hiding, her name passed quietly from house to house, the woman crushed for Christ. Even those who did not share her faith spoke of her courage. They said she died without hatred, without pleading, with only prayer on her lips. The officials in London took note of the reaction. The Crown's enforcers, used to the fear of public executions, were disturbed by the pity her death evoked. Pressing peine forte et dure had been used before, but rarely had it drawn such outrage. Within a few years, it began to fade from English practice, replaced by other forms of punishment. Margaret's death had not just silenced her, it had shamed the law itself. Her husband, John Clitherow, lived on in quiet grief. He was never charged, but his business suffered, his house searched repeatedly. Their children, orphaned in spirit, were left to carry both the name and the burden of her choice. Yet it was her faith that endured in them. Her eldest son, Henry, was only 12 when he saw his mother arrested. He would later flee to France and become a priest in defiance of the English laws. Her daughter Anne became a nun, living out the same devotion that had killed her mother. Each carried a fragment of the woman who refused to kneel before tyranny. For nearly 4 centuries, her grave remained unmarked. But her story did not die. Pilgrims began to visit the site of her home, lighting candles beneath the old beams of the shambles. They said prayers not only for her, but for all who suffered for belief, Protestant, Catholic, or otherwise. Over time, her legend grew beyond sects and dogma. She became less a figure of one faith and more a symbol of human defiance. The quiet, unbroken courage of someone who would not betray her soul, even when crushed beneath the world. By the 19th century, historians began to revisit her trial. They uncovered court records, letters, and witness accounts long buried in archives. The details were chillingly clear. Her refusal to plead had been deliberate. She chose the slow, suffocating death to protect her family's name and property, a final act of defiance that preserved her children as future at the cost of her life. In 1970, Pope Paul VI canonized her as one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. Her story was retold in sermons, plays, and even modern art, yet the essence of her tragedy remained the same. A woman crushed not only by stone, but by the weight of power disguised as righteousness. The house where she once lived still stands in York, its walls darkened by time. Inside, there's a small altar, candles flickering beneath an image of her calm face. Visitors describe an eerie quiet there, a stillness heavy with memory. The Shambles is now a tourist street, crowded and bright, but in that one house, time has stopped. The irony is haunting. The same city that once watched her die in silence now protects her story in reverence. She has become York's saint, but also its mirror, a reminder of what blind faith and state power can do when fused. Her execution remains one of the last recorded uses of pressing in England. It was abolished formally decades later. And though the stones that crushed her were long scattered, her name endures as a warning that justice without conscience becomes cruelty, and that silence, forced or chosen, can be the loudest protest of all. History remembers kings and wars, but it rarely remembers the weight of one woman's breath as it has forced from her lungs under the burden of injustice. Margaret Clitherow's death was not meant to inspire. It was meant to erase. Yet centuries later, her story continues to breathe, a voice from beneath the stones that still whispers, "Faith cannot be crushed." If you've ever wondered how belief, defiance, and humanity collide in the darkest corners of history, this is only one of many forgotten stories. The world's past is filled with moments like this, where silence spoke louder than screams. Follow for more true stories buried by time, the brutal, the sacred, and the ones that remind us what it means to endure.